So there's going to be a shoot coming out of the stump of Jesse, and a branch, ntzer, from his roots shall bear fruit. So what do we name our town? Well, literally, right? You take the word for branch, ntzer, and you name your shoot-ville or branch town, if you want to make the distinction between shoot and branch. So they're the branch of David, which makes them quite literally, if you know your recent U.S. history from the early 90s, branch Davidians. All right, folks, we're heading into our next lesson. This one is a good one because everybody knows this line from John. Can anything good come from Nazareth? This is the query that Nathanael has when told that the Messiah is Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So this is a really interesting one because we're going to get into some of the biblical names, the geography, some of the biblical names or some of the names of the cities and the geography and why all of that matters. Why those maps that you have these maps in the back of your Bible, nobody ever looks at them. You kind of wonder, what are they doing there? Well, they really help us understand the story of what's going on in the text. So that's what we're going to do for this lesson. Let me give you a short reminder here. So we have a weekly live Bible study. It's each Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Central. And honestly, there's a couple people who call in. They're calling in from work. They just put their phone on. It's Zoom, so you don't have to have your camera on. That's no problem. So if you want to join us, you're more than welcome to join us. If you want to sign up and at least get the emails that I sent out, and I've got extra resources there for the on a Google Drive, you're more than welcome. Just go to our website, figtreeteaching.com. You see the link or the tab at the top for Coffee Club. Click on that. And for instance, these lessons that I publish generally 35 to 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, but we can go much longer. We have a lot more discussion, and it's just a better opportunity to kind of riff and then ask questions and then to go a little bit deeper. We don't have interaction when you're just listening on a podcast or watching on YouTube. So this is the opportunity to have a little bit deeper discussion, or at least to listen in, right? Sometimes you hear people ask questions and they give you a little bit of insight. So let's go on. Let's move to our topic today. And it's this famous question that Nathanael has. Can anything good come from Nazareth? And, our tendency when we're reading through the lens of 2,000 years of Christianity is to think that this is an insult to Jesus. And I don't think that. And I think when you get done with this lesson today, you'll see why scholars don't necessarily think it's an insult. Maybe he's having fun, he's jabbing at Nazareth, something like that. So I think you'll see that as we go through this today. So just a quick preview. As Jesus is building his group of disciples, it's always important to remember these people, where they're from, which might tell us a little bit about them. And then as they show up in the story, then, we get to think about who this person is. They made it into the Hall of Fame. They're in the Bible. Okay, so we're just going to real quickly, we'll talk about Philip. We're going to talk about Nathanael. Nathanael, the word means a gift from God or a gift of God or given of God, but Nathanael, so he's a gift from God. You have, we'll see why we have to talk about Cana, and then we will talk about the village of Nazareth. So here's the text. It's John 1. It's only verses 43 to 46 is what I'm going to look at today. By the way, there is a handout. You will see screenshots of that handout. So it's on the website, downloads in a PDF. and I think it'll help you go through the lesson today with me. Okay, so the scripture reads like this. Verse 43, the next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. Now, we did this a couple lessons ago because geography is actually really important. Well, it's important everywhere. If you go to the United States and someone says, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, well, it tells you something about maybe the attitude or the understanding that they have. If they said, I'm from Boston, you said, where at in Boston? I'm from Southie. It gives you an idea that, if he tells you he's from Southie, well, then he's proud of being from Southie. So it is important that we understand some of the geography. Okay, so the next day he decided to go to Galilee, which means he's not in Galilee, he's outside Galilee, and he then goes into Galilee. He finds Philip, and he says, follow me. Verse 44, now Philip was from Bethsaida. Now that's an important town because, Bethsaida is such a small little fishing village that sits right on the Sea of Galilee, not in Galilee proper. Bethsaida is on the side of Herod Philip, but this little teeny town is where you have John and Philip and Andrew and Peter. And they're all coming out of this city, and you think, wow, they all know each other. And the next thing you know, they're the beginning of a movement as they took Jesus' teaching out into the world. Very courageously, I might add. So it's important to see that this little town, and God loves to use those who people would consider to not be powerful to then add to his plan of redemption. Okay, so Philip, verse 45, Philip found Nathanael, and he says to him, we have found him. Oh, here we go, Nathanael. We'll talk about why it's important that we're going to understand where Nathanael is from. He says, we have found him whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, son of Joseph. Now, we did that last week, why it's important that John is telling us son of Joseph, because throughout his gospel, he's pointing out the rabbis expected two messiahs. This was the previous lesson. This was Messiah, son of David, which is a reigning righteous king and judge, and Messiah, son of Joseph, who came to suffer for the sins of the people. So that's what Jesus does. Now, he does both. He's both. So that's pretty cool. Okay, verse 46, here it is. Nathanael said to him, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And Philip gives him, this is the rabbinic phrase, to invite you into learning, to invite you in for your eyes to open. Come and see. So throughout the rabbinic writings, you'll have the phrase, come and see, or come and hear. And it's the invitation to say, let's go expand your awareness so that you can see God more clearly, see his presence in what's happening. Okay, so there's our verse. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? So we've got Philip. He's from Bethsaida. Important to know. And, oh, by the way, we did this in one of the first 5 lessons that we did on John last year. We talked about John in the city of Ephesus, because John ends up going to Ephesus. That's over in Asia Minor, today Turkey. Well, who else goes to Asia Minor? Philip. Philip takes his family. He goes right down the street to a city called Hierapolis. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's absolutely beautiful. It's a vacation spot for Europeans. Hot baths everywhere. So it's a beautiful, beautiful city right across the valley from Laodicea. That's where Philip ends up going. Everybody in John's community knows Phil. He comes to all the conventions. He speaks at Sabbath to tell stories about Jesus. Okay, so we got Philip. Then you got Nathanael, the gift of God. Now, what's important to note, John does not tell us at the beginning of his gospel. You have to go all the way to the end, chapter 21, and you find out that Nathanael is from Cana. Now, Cana is the way as us anglicized people say it, Cana. Okay? And then finally, we're going to get to this village called Nazareth. Now, I mentioned geography actually will help you. I'll show you a book in a minute that I'm relying on, written by a scholar by the name of, he's a late scholar, he passed away. His name is Bargil Pixner. He was a Franciscan and an archaeologist, and he lived there in Israel. And he talks all the time about how you pick up things from the land, not because some scholar wrote it down. So the land is the fifth gospel. The land speaks to you. One of the professors at Jerusalem University College there in Jerusalem would say, we're going to go learn the Bible with our feet. That was Dr. Paul Wright would say that. Because you learn by walking around. Okay, so here's a map. You have the Sea of Galilee. This is a map of up in the Galilee. So Bethsaida is just northeast of the Sea of Galilee, and that is where we have Philip. So right here, Philip. Then, if you go to the left on the map, you see straight to the west of the Sea of Galilee is the city of Cana or Cana, and that we have Nathanael. So Nathanael is here. He's from Cana. Then if you go directly south from Cana, it's maybe 4 or 5 miles. You get to a city called Sepphoris. And then about another 4 miles south of Sepphoris is the city of Nazareth, and that's where Jesus is from. Now, a lot of people want to know if Joseph was a carpenter. Now, this is terrible translation because we say carpenter. It doesn't. The word tekton means builder. Now, it doesn't say builder with wood. Just go to Israel and walk around, go to Sepphoris, see how much of Sepphoris was built with wood. It's like 0. So it's all stone. And, you could say, well, does it really matter? Kind of. When we're talking about Jesus, the more accurate we can get, the more we can understand a stonemason, somebody who builds with stone, who shapes stones, because all of us are living stones, and every once in a while you don't fit where Jesus needs you to fit inside this spiritual house that he's building that we call church. And oh, by the way, he's going to get out his hammer and chisel, and he's going to start chiseling away at your life and say, this isn't fitting any longer. Get rid of that magazine. Stop gossiping over here. Stop watching basketball every weekend. Something like that. It's a chiseling and shaping process because Jesus works with stone, and you, according to Peter, are a living stone. So the metaphor fits better than carpenter. Anyways, where did Jesus work when he was growing up as a kid? Sepphoris, right there between Nazareth and Cana, because it had been destroyed and being rebuilt. So where do you go if you need work? You go rebuild in Sepphoris. Okay. So this is a little screenshot from the handout that you can find on the website. Look in the description section below either the podcast or the YouTube video, and you'll see a link where you can pull this PDF from. So we have Philip. He's from Bethsaida. It's that little teeny fishing village, but it's east of the Jordan River. That's in the territory of Herod Philip. You then have Nathanael, a gift from God, and he happens to be from Cana, but we only learn that later in John. Now, when we get to the word, the city, little village called Cana, Hebrew Kana, little teeny village, not very significant, but oddly enough, it's only John that mentions Cana. And Cana is prominent in John. Water to wine in Cana. Heals the servant's son in Cana. Nathanael from Cana. So what does this mean? What is Cana all about? We need to figure that out. And then finally, Nazareth. Okay? Nazareth. Tiny village. Today, big because Jesus made it famous. His ancestors continued to live there. But in the first century, it was a very, very small. But here's what's important. Nazareth sits in what's called the tribal allotment of Zebulun. Now, we don't ever talk about Zebulun. Why do we need to know about Zebulun, one of the sons of Jacob, one of the 12 tribes? But we do need to know tribal allotments. The tribal allotments help us actually understand the story that's going on in the Bible. So let me show you one map here. You see the Sea of Galilee. That's central up in Galilee. And Nazareth sits right here. That's in white, so you can see it almost center of the map. And we notice that Nazareth is in the tribal allotment of Zebulun. Okay? Now we need to know this because there's a prophecy. We need to be paying attention when we see it in our text that, God is going to do a good work, a big work in Zebulun. So Jesus grows up in Nazareth. That's in the tribal allotment of Zebulun. But then he goes over and he makes his hometown Capernaum. That's north. So if you look right above the Sea of Galilee, I put a little star there in white. That's where Capernaum is. What tribal allotment is Capernaum in? Naphtali. Here's Naphtali. Okay? Why do we need to know this? Let's look at Isaiah. This and Isaiah 9, folks. Everybody loves Isaiah 9 at Christmas time. To us a child is born, the wonderful counselor. This is where we get to us a child is born prophecy out of Isaiah 9:1. Let's read. There will be no gloom for her who is in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Okay, so there's our two tribal allotments. But in latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the nations. Verse 2, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. And what is that light going to be? The Messiah. And the Messiah is going to come out of Zebulun and Naphtali. Where does Jesus go? Or I'm sorry, he didn't choose it. His parents chose it. Okay? He goes right, it's right here. That little teeny, look how small Zebulun is. That's a small area. Beautiful valley, by the way, beautiful, if you ever get to go there. But if you think about that, what a tiny little tribal allotment. And yet, it gets to be the most important one because the Messiah is going to come from there. And then, after he leaves Nazareth, he goes into Naphtali, and he sets up his home there. So, Jesus, that's not coincidence, basically. He knows what he's doing. He's sending you a message because where he's from and where he's going to make up his home in Capernaum. Okay? So it's important to know these little details. They help to illuminate the text. So let's talk about a little bit real quick. So we need to understand the history, well, not only the nation of Israel, but the land there in Galilee. And I don't know where you're at listening to this. I'm speaking in the United States. So if someone is listening in the United States, you would know your history. And if you wanted to say, what is all of this stuff? What are all the things happening in the world with Americans today? What are all the historical references? Well, we have to go backwards in time, and we can go back to, well, there was a revolution and we separated from England, and then, and then we had slavery, and then we had a civil war. And so you could go through this and say these things are still affecting us today. Our history matters, right? And if you're in the United Kingdom, you would say that depending on where you're at in the United Kingdom, you definitely know your history. So if a visitor came in and said, now what's that all about? You would tell them this is the history of the land. If you're in Australia, if you're in South Africa, it doesn't matter. Wherever you're at in the world, you know the history of where you're from, and that history then matters to the things that are happening today. So let's go a little bit of Galilee history, and I'm going to do this real fast. But these are important dates. If you just memorize the dates and the flow, that will help you in all of your biblical studies. Actually, one of the best things you can do is draw a timeline. give yourself some concrete visual. So we start in 722. What happened there in 722 was that the Assyrians, the Assyrian Empire, came down and took the northern kingdom, which is called Israel or sometimes called Ephraim, took them into exile, captivity. So that's 722, and that's Galilee. Galilee was decimated. They then, they being the Assyrians, they populated because, back then everyone said, well, wait a minute, the land must have a god. So if the land has a god, then we need to know how to worship that god that's attached to this piece of land. So what do? They bring people back to the region to teach the people they had populated there how to worship God. And that's where you get the Samaritans. Really important to know that Samaritans come out of this whole 722 debacle. Okay, now, close to 200 years later, what do we get? Well, now it's Nebuchadnezzar. Now it's Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar, then comes over, takes Jerusalem and the southern kingdom, and they go into exile. Then, after the Persians defeat the Babylonians, then the Persians, King Cyrus, who's also called a Messiah because he was anointed by God for a particular task. So King Cyrus, the Messiah for Israel, he lets Ezra and Nehemiah come back and rebuild the temple. But a lot of people, they stayed in Babylon. From 500 to 165, well, Jerusalem's ruled over by the Persians, so they don't actually govern themselves. And then the Greeks defeat the Persians, and now the Greeks are in charge, and, well, we're still not governing ourselves, so why leave, right? You're in Babylon, you have a job, maybe you started a business, the kids are in high school, you don't want to move them right before they graduate, whatever it is. So you stay in Babylon. But then, what happens around 165 BC? This group that is known as the Maccabees, they led a revolt in Israel because the temple in Jerusalem had been defiled, and they get the temple back. They rededicate the temple, this dedication ceremony. Dedication is Hanuk, so the feast of dedication is Hanukkah. And so the Maccabees set in motion something where Israel is going to begin to manage and govern their own country again. They gain their freedom back. And this is incredible because for the first time in hundreds of years, the Jews are going to be able to govern themselves in the land as God intended it. So between 160 and about 63 BC, especially around the year 110 to 100, you're going to get a large influx of Jews coming from Babylon. And the thing is, it isn't just, hey, look, we're going to govern ourselves again, so we might get some land and, restart our lives. It's at this moment, they're having messianic expectations. What if Messiah, son of David, becomes the king, and the king rebuilds the glory that Israel once was when King David was ruling, or Solomon was ruling? So when this influx of Jews comes in, you also get with it an influx of messianic expectation. The expectation of the king returning to rule. Then what happens in 63 BC? And that's when Rome shows up. And this is not good. The important period is right here, this 100-year period, where they're coming back to the land. Now, they're coming back to the land. The land is down by Jerusalem and Judah, the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. Well, that's packed. So where are we going to live? And they settled up in the Galilee. So you have these recent immigrants who are settling their cities and living up in Galilee. Now, if you think about it, because they come from Babylon, they were worshiping God, but they have their own sets of customs. They were not temple-centric. They had synagogue, and they had rabbis. And instead of temple and priest, you have synagogue and rabbis, and they worship different. So their worship style is different. They have different interpretations from Jerusalem, and that causes problems. They don't get along. But when Rome shows up, you've come back because you thought you had your freedom. And then Rome shows up, they tax you, and then if you can't pay your taxes, they steal your land. Now, you tell me, how are you feeling in that moment? Well, those people were not happy. Okay? So this is their history. And what they're looking for is a king who's going to get rid of these pesky Romans. Okay? Now, a great resource for you. I've had this on my shelf for 20 years, and I always go back and look at the details. It's a great book. It's called The Paths of the Messiah. Now, it's Messianic sites in Galilee and Jerusalem, but just go, or if you go to Amazon, Paths of the Messiah, the author's name is Bargill Pixner. Okay? He talks about this idea of messianic expectations, that the Messiah is going to be the one that's eventually going to lead Jerusalem out of this mess we have with the Romans. Okay? Or I'm sorry, the Messiah is going to lead the Israelites out of this mess that we have with the Romans. Okay, now, one detail that you have to know. Of the 12 tribes of Jacob, 2 of the tribes are going to keep detailed record of their tribal genealogy. So the first one is Levi. The second one is Judah. Now, we have to ask why. Why would they keep detailed records of which tribe they're from? So first, if you're just in the tribe of Levi, you're the tribe that runs the temple. You run temple operations. But within the tribe of Levi, if you happen to be a descendant of Aaron, right, because Moses is from the tribe of Levi, but his brother Aaron then becomes the first priest, and anybody descended of Aaron is a priest. And that becomes very important because, it's not like you say, I'm going to grow up and maybe get go get a 4-year degree, and then let me think about going to seminary or whatever, and I'll go be a priest. That's not what people did. You were born into the possibility of being a priest. At the end of the synagogue service, somebody is going to say the Aaronic blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. Well, who's allowed to do that? So they'll say, is anybody a son of Aaron in the room? Yes, we have one. Oh, good. Would you come give the blessing for the people? So it is important that they know their genealogy. Okay, what about Judah? Why do we need to know if you're from the tribe of Judah? And it has to do, of course, with David. And who's going to come out of the line of David? The Messiah. So we need to know. That's why Matthew starts out with a genealogy. Luke has a genealogy. They're telling the people of that day where they're from. Okay, making sure that Jesus is connected to David as the Messiah. Okay, that's just an important piece that you have to know because now we're going to go to Nazareth. And we're going to talk about this town, not only the way Bargill Pixner describes this town, but where they got their name. Nazareth, it's up in the Galilee. It's not mentioned in the Old Testament. So they recognize archaeologically there had been people living there, maybe 900 BC to 800 BC. Then it looks like it was abandoned. Then it was picked back up again. And most likely, when you have this large influx of Jews coming in from Babylon, so it's settled, resettled. It's a very small town. But it appears that when they came back from Babylon, these are descendants in the line of David. Now, how would they know that? Because they keep their genealogy. And if you're going to come into set up your village, you have to do 2 things. Where are we going to live? What tribal allotment? Oh, I have an idea. How about Zebulun? Well, wait, Asher's nice. It's over by the coast. Yeah, but Asher doesn't have messianic expectations. We have messianic expectations. So we set up our village in Zebulun because that's where the light is going to come out of. So they have this expectation of a coming messianic kingdom. And so we go then to the Hebrew, and you have a word, ntzer, and it means either shoot or branch, okay? And it's right in Isaiah 11:1. This is a Messianic chapter. It's a Messianic prophecy. Here's what it says. There shall come forth a shoot. Now, that first one, I'll show you a picture in a minute, is called hoter. I'll show you that one in a minute. Because what Isaiah is doing is parallelism. You put one thing in one verse, the next verse has something similar but a little bit different. Okay, there shall come forth a shoot out of the stump of Jesse. Well, who's Jesse? Who's the stump of Jesse? That's King David's father. So there's going to be a shoot coming out of the stump of Jesse, and a branch, ntzer, from his roots shall bear fruit. Ah. Okay. Now, let me just show you a picture real quick. And part of the reason I wanted I want to show you hoter versus ntzer is when I first learned about this, I didn't know very much about Hebrew, and I went online and I was looking underneath to see what the word was. And when I saw hoter, I got really dismayed because I was like, well, that's not the word at all. I didn't read far enough, and I didn't understand the relationship between hoter and ntzer. Okay, so let me show you. This is an olive tree somewhere up in northern Israel, this olive grove. It's very old, but it's not being farmed. So these are just old trees. So there's an olive tree. And then I took a picture. It is a little bit difficult to see, and I apologize about that. But if you look close enough, you have a tree coming out of the ground. And then what you have at the base of the tree are all these shoots. Now, those shoots coming off are hoter. That's what hoter is. And hoter is also connected to, as it was explained to me in Israel, it's like a family, like your descendants, right? So if you're the olive tree, then your descendants are the hoter that come off of you. It's one way to think about it. I mean, they're always taking these abstract ideas and looking around at nature and saying, oh, that's what we're talking about. So that would be a picture of hoter. But if we go to this tree, now you could see this one looks like hoter, right? And what you can do with a hoter like that is you can pull it out. There's a little ball on the end, and you can make a staff, like for shepherding. So that's the hoter. But if you go further up in the tree, you're going to end up with a branch. That's where the fruit grows. So two different words, but you have this idea of a branch. And the branch is what's going to be out of the stump of Jesse, but that's where the fruit is coming out of, okay? So it's the upper part that bears the fruit. So what did they do? So we have to name our town. We're descendants of David. We have messianic expectations, and we think the Messiah is going to come from us. So what do we name our town? Well, literally, right? You take the word for branch, ntzer, and you name your shoot-ville or branch town if you want to make the distinction between shoot and branch. So they're the branch of David, which makes them quite literally, if you know your recent U.S. history from the early 90s, Branch Davidians. Now, today, Branch Davidians that was a cult down in Waco, Texas. But literally, they named their town from the branch from Isaiah, because the branch is going to come out of us. And so the idea here is when Nathanael hears Nazareth, you go, wait, that little town? Those people are crazy. Those Davidians, they're fanatical that the Messiah is going to come out of them, but they're a little nuts. They got their own synagogue. Whatever's going on here, this is village rivalries, right? Because Cana's just right up the road. They know where Nazareth is, and they might think they're a little bit nuts, because all they talk about is how the Messiah is going to come out of them. Now, what's cool is, where did the Messiah come out of? Exactly. He comes out of Branch Town. I mean, if he's the branch, then He's got to come out of branch down. If Jesus is the bread of the earth, where is he born? Bet-lehem, the house of bread. That makes sense. So God's coordinated. So this is so cool to me. They're being very intentional about what they're doing and how they named their town and where and what tribal allotment they put it in, because they have big expectations from God. Now, I want to show you one example of another settlement that was recent, up near the Sea of Galilee, that's also named with Messianic expectations. And the city, Kokaba. So Kokaba, another very small village, and the word for star is kokab. And the star that they're talking about is coming out of Numbers 24:17. So I have it here on the screen. Verse 17, this is the prophecy, says, I see him, but not now. I see him. I see this figure off into the future, right? The prophet has a vision, but he doesn't know the timeline of the vision. He just knows, I see him off in the future. Behold him, but not near. He's somewhere out in the future, but I don't know how far away he is. And then he says this, a star, kokab, there's your Hebrew word, shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Now, you could do two things. The northern kingdom is called Israel or Ephraim. Okay, so is it just the nation of Israel, or is it this specific area, which is the northern kingdom? So you could see what they did here next to my number 7, Kokaba. They named their village the Star Town. Now, oddly enough, if we fast forward, this is just another, I want to show you how prominent this is. Just after the first century, you had the Jewish revolt in 66 to 70 AD. That's when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. Then, about 70 years later, scholars call the Second Jewish Revolt in 32. Because the Caesar was going to come in, hey, I got an idea. Where you guys used to have your temple there, I'm going to build a new temple. But the temple's going to be to Jupiter. Didn't make the people happy. There was a revolt. It's called the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Now, Bar Kokhba, there's a messianic figure, and they thought he literally was the Messiah. And they gave him the name Bar Kokhba because Bar in Aramaic means son. So they give him a name, Son of the Star, just like Messiah, son of David, or Messiah, son of Joseph. This is Messiah, son of the Star. So the reason I bring this up is it's not just Nazareth that has this messianic expectation that names their town something that has to do with the Messiah. It's all over that northern part, okay? Now, let me go. Last thing here is we need to talk about Cana. Now, Cana, that's anglicized. You know, if you're from Northeast Ohio, you might go Cana, and you have a little nasally when you say Cana. But Cana, in Hebrew, the word is kana, often spelled with a Q, but it's a hard kana. Okay? Now, the Hebrew word kana means zeal or zealous. So in Exodus 20, verse 5, this is part of the 10 Commandments. God says, do not make any images from the waters above or the waters below the earth. And then it says, you shall not bow down to them or serve them. He's talking about the false gods, idols. And then he says this, and this is terrible translation, but in English, it says, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous. No, not jealous. Jealous sounds petty. Like, I'm really jealous because you're hanging out with your friends, your other friends this weekend, which means I've kind of got, Jealous is petty. No, the word there is kana. God is a zealous, a kana God. And kana is not petty, I wish I could be with you. Zealous is passionate. God is passionate. if you take your eyes off of God and start worshiping something else, it's going to lead you astray and you don't know it because you're just a sheep. You don't have a shepherd at that moment. So God says, don't do that. And the moment you make an image out of this false god, you're likely to bow down to it. Don't do that. I'm a passionate God. I want you to follow me. So the Hebrew kana, zeal. Okay, now there's a great story here in the book of Numbers. Well, it's a little bit disturbing, but it's a story about the Israelites. They had kind of they went off the reservation a bit, and they started having intimate relations with the Moabite women. And right in front of the tabernacle, that God's house, and of course, there's a character here named Pinhas, or we say Phineas, and he's a priest. And he is going to go knock that business off. He's going to get rid of it, right? Now, verse 10, you can go read about this in Numbers 25, but verse 10, the Lord said to Moses, Pinhas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, so we know he's from the priesthood, he has turned my anger away from the Israelites since he was as zealous, Hebrew, kana, since he was as zealous for my honor among them as I am, I did not put an end to them in my zeal, kana. So God is zealous, and Pinhas is zealous. And you tend to think after what Pinhas did, God would say, now, Pinhas, settle down. Don't need to overreact to this or anything. He doesn't. God says, Pinhas, I will make a covenant with you and your descendants. You will be a priest forever. Pinhas becomes a hero figure to those Jews who were passionate about keeping the word of God. And so we find that the Maccabees, that group the revolutionaries who overthrew this Greek army, that no way they could have won that. God must have been in it. Their hero is Pinhas because they were zealous for God's law. The Maccabees were, and they called themselves the Kanaim, the zealous ones. And their hero, of course, Pinhas. Now, the Kanaim, right? It's not an organized group, but there were zealous people who lived in the Galilee, and they hated the Romans. And by the first century, you've now got a more formalized movement with a capital Z. Who knows if they had a membership card or anything. They're the zealots, and that's where we get that idea of the zealots, those who fiercely opposed Rome. So tell me about the inhabitants of Cana. Now that's anglicized. What if we said, tell me about the inhabitants of Cana? The zealous ones. What did they name their town? Zealousville. Zeal Town. How passionate are those people for the word of God? And Paul himself says, I was zealous. St. Jerome tells us that Paul's parents were zealots. They got caught up in a tax revolt. And Paul tells us, yes, I was zealous for the law. But then Paul says, look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to be zealous for good works. Take that same passion and turn it into something good. And this is exactly what Jesus does with the disciples. He takes the disciples and all that zealous energy that they had for God, the passionate energy, not petty, and he turns it into a movement that changes the world. So we have to contain and focus the zeal so it doesn't get out of hand. Zealousness can go wrong. We need to focus our zealousness. So you have a city, ntzer or Netzerat. They're called Branch Town. The Messiah is coming from us. We're Branch Davidians. Right? And maybe Nathanael, who's from a town that's called Cana, Zealousville. And Nathanael says, What good can come out of Nazareth? Is he just, again, we take it as an insult, but it might be that, well, I know those people, they're all interacting. They know the history. They know the little town. So it's possible it's just village rivalry when you go back and you think about this. But this is very important to see. Is it possible that even Nathanael is one of those zealous types, and that's why he's over somewhere near Bethsaida? Because where that zealot headquarters was in the first century is right next to Bethsaida in a town called Gamla. Gamla is a word that means camel, because that was their town was built on a hill that looks like a camel. But is it possible that even Nathanael is one of the zealous ones? Because if you're born in Zeal Town, boy, we know what type of person or your parents are, right? You're not sitting around watching college football on a Saturday. You're in the synagogue, passionately studying the Word of God. Okay, so we don't want to go negative against Nathanael. I don't think it's like an insult against Jesus. He's passionate about the Word of God. And he knows that little village of Nazareth. Really? Okay. Whatever. Let me go check it out. Now, when we go to the next lesson, now you're going to have this interaction that Nathanael has with Jesus.